thank you much. Chair reminds me of Shelley Berman, which dates me, but I don't know if it's quite the routine I'm going to do today. Anyway, it's very good to be here, and thanks to JVP, and thanks for all of you people and Busboys and Poets for having me. I've spoken before in Busboys and Poets a number of years ago, not here, so I'm a little familiar with the scene. So what I'd like to do tonight is something different. I'm very happy during the questions and answers to talk about the situation in Israel-Palestine, where we are, and the implications of the failure of the Kerry Initiative, and one state, two states, all that stuff. But tonight I want to talk about something different, and that's what I call global Palestine. I think the Palestinian issue is really pivotal in many kinds of ways. You know, it's not simply a localized conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. If it was just that, it really wouldn't be of much of an interest to anybody beyond people from those communities. But it affects not just Israelis and Palestinians, but obviously the wider Arab world, the wider Muslim worlds, where the Palestinians are really seen as kind of emblematic of peoples fighting neo-colonialism and even the capitalist system and so on. Certainly the Israel-Palestine conflict is at the crux of the alienation between the Muslim worlds and the West. It has to do with oil and energy and security. In a lot of ways, it's a global conflict that affects the entire... As a matter of fact, I think that's the main reason why it gets the attention it does. You know, Alan Dershowitz always complains that it gets too much disproportionate coverage, and therefore it shows that there's anti-Semitism at work, because why is everybody looking at what the Jews are doing, all that kind of stuff. But in fact, you know, there are conflicts that are even worse. You can't really compare conflicts than the Israel-Palestine one. For example, the conflict in the Congo and other places. But they don't get the attention because they don't disrupt the international system the way the Israel-Palestine conflict does. And I think that's one reason why it gets the disproportionate attention that it does. Obviously, it's of concern to Americans. I don't think Americans are aware of how isolated the United States has become in the international community because of its position, its uncritical position on Israel. It certainly affects the Jewish community here. I mean, it's one of the major issues in electoral campaigns. So in many ways, the Palestinian issue is much broader than simply the localized conflict itself. But there's another aspect that we don't talk about too much that I think is very relevant. It's another part of the global aspect, and that's what I call global Palestine. In other words, I started the new book I'm writing, and we'll talk about it tonight. I haven't really presented it very much, so I might be stammering and stuttering. This is helping me to kind of get my own thoughts together, because I'm writing a book about something I know nothing about, which is the military. And I couldn't tell you a howitzer from a Uzi, but I'm on a steep learning curve, which is interesting, and I think it's significant. But the idea of global Palestine is, well, let me put it this way. One of the things I started with was a question that's been nagging at me. How does Israel get away with this? You know, I mean, all right, you've got AIPAC, and you have Christian fundamentalism, and you have guilt over the Holocaust, all that stuff I know, and it all plays a certain role. But I keep having also in the back of my mind this famous saying of our friend Henry Kissinger, that countries don't have friends. They have interests. And I can't really see the United States and European countries and other countries running their foreign policy over such an important issue as the Middle East, with all the energy and the geopolitics involved, and paying the price, especially the United States, paying the price in the international community it does, and so on, just because of the Jewish vote, important as it might be, or just because of AIPAC. In my view, there's got to be some other big reason, some elephant in the room that would explain that somehow we're not seeing. And as I've been kind of casting around for what that would be, I think the military, and not just the military, but the way Israel has managed to insert itself in what I call the process of global pacification, I think begins to get at how Israel is serving the interests of the different hegemons in the world. Certainly the United States, and the larger hegemons in Europe and so on, but all the way down, we'll see, all the way down to localized. I think Israel has more global reach in terms of military security stuff than the United States does. I mean, the United States has 174 bases in 174 countries. It has a big global reach, but it's very superficial in a sense. It's aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines and F-16s and the big, what are called big platforms. But they work mainly with governments and other militaries. Whereas Israel is deeply involved in countries everywhere. I don't know if there's almost any country where you don't find Israelis involved not only in the military, but in the security services, in the presidential guard, in guarding the World Cup, in guarding the Olympics, in working with local police forces, including Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. loves the Israeli police. In other words, Israel is not only in these countries, but it's in the countries in layered ways much deeper than the United States, where it really gets into internal things. A couple of years ago, Israel and Canada signed what was called the Israel-Canada Public Safety. Now, public safety is internal, it's domestic, it isn't military. A public safety, because it wasn't a treaty. It wasn't even an agreement, because those kinds of things have to go through parliaments. They have to be approved. There's a certain transparency. It was simply the internal security ministers of both governments that signed a kind of an agreement that didn't go through nobody knew about it. It didn't go through any vetting in the parliaments, in which Israel, in a lot of ways, takes over public safety in Canada. And that's really, you've always had militaries cooperating. But countries, your sovereignty is, the essence of your sovereignty is inside your country, in your domestic life. And you don't let other countries normally come in and intervene in your domestic affairs. So here you have a Canada-Israel public safety agreement. Is it moved in a transparent sort of a way? And in security politics, it's a whole different logic. That if you're not plugged into that world and into those considerations of military and so on, it's hard to understand. For example, everybody thinks that there's an Israel-Arab war going on, and that if anybody is an enemy of Israel or antagonistic to Israel, it's Saudi Arabia, one of the most fundamentalist Muslim countries in the world. But actually Saudi Arabia and Israel have some very close relationships. including military relationships, mainly revolving around their common enemy, which is Iran. So if you look at normal international politics, it's hard to explain why Israel and Saudi Arabia would be close to each other. As a matter of fact, if you remember the film by Michael Moore, which was it called? Fahrenheit?
9/11.
Was that the one?
I think so.
Where he talks about the Bush family's relation to the Bin Laden family in Saudi Arabia and how close they are to Israel. But he doesn't make the other, I don't know what it is, the hypotenuse or whatever it is in the triangle, the other side. What about, all right, there's an American-Israeli tie, there's an American-Saudi tie. Well, what about the Israeli-Saudi tie? Well, nobody thinks about that because in normal international politics, those countries are supposed to be enemies. They have no diplomatic relations. They're certainly not speaking the same language. But if you look at their security politics, you begin to look at military cooperation. You begin to look at cooperation regionally and operationally. All of a sudden you discover that Israel and Saudi Arabia are actually much closer in many ways than Israel is to the United States. I'll give you just one other quick example. China. You know, Israel's whole thing is, you know, we're a strategic ally of the United States. This is what AIPAC will tell you. We love America. We share common moral values with you. You know, Obama goes and says, you know, Israel is America. There's a joke, by the way, that I heard in the State Department. Why doesn't Israel want to be the 51st state? Because then it would only have 2 senators.